Hey folks, Tennessee State Senator Bo Watson here. On today's episode of Tennessee Today, I had a really great interview and discussion, really more of a discussion than an interview, with Justin Owen, who is the CEO and president of the Beacon Center. The Beacon Center is a policy think tank. Justin and I talked about an array of subjects from property tax to the hall income tax, to school choice, to what think tanks do, what their purpose is, how you can discern between different types of think tanks. It's a really good discussion that really will help clue you into how legislators use think tanks and similar types of organizations to help gather information about the policy debates we're having at the Tennessee Capitol in Nashville. So I hope you'll take the time to listen. Justin's incredibly intelligent, but yet very articulate in explaining things. So I hope you'll take the time and listen in. Do you ever wonder what's really going on in government, locally, in the state of Tennessee, and across the country? I'm Tennessee State Senator Bo Watson, and on Tennessee Today, we dive into the issues that shape our communities, from local policy to national debates. Each episode, I break down key topics and issues, share my perspective from over 20 years in the Tennessee legislature, and talk with guests about the decisions that impact your daily life. I hope you enjoy these honest conversations and that they help you stay informed and engaged. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Tennessee Today wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. You know, I've had some really good guests in every episode, and I kind of look forward to every guest that I have. But today I'm really excited about my guest, Justin Owen from the Beacon Center. Justin and I have known each other for over 10 years now. I've been in the legislature now for 21 years. And Justin, when did you first arrive at the legislature? Before we get into your whole history, when did you first arrive?
I think my first year lobbying was probably 2011. So it's been quite a while.
Yeah. So, I mean, 2026, 2011. So 15 years in some shape, form, or fashion, we've known each other. And Justin, of course, is the executive director for and president, CEO, and all those terms for the Beacon Center, which is a think tank located in the Nashville area and provides a lot of policy feedback for the public as well as for legislators, and I'm sure a lot of other things, and we'll talk about that. But before getting into all that, Justin, a little bit of your story. You're a native West Tennessean, I think, and went to, did you go to Middle Tennessee State University?
I did. I grew up in rural West Tennessee on a farm and went to MTSU undergrad, Memphis Law School, and then moved back to Nashville, and I've been in the Nashville area since 2008.
Now, during law school, were you interested in being, at that time in your life, were you interested in being a litigator, or were you really kind of interested in using the skill set that you learned with law, the study of law, then transferring that over to what you're doing now?
I was kind of torn. At one point, I wanted to go into real estate law and do that area. So I graduated in 2008, and if you remember what the real estate market was like that at the time, wasn't a good career to go into. And I'd actually interned at Beacon during law school and really loved it. I had worked on political campaigns, actually worked on Jim Tracy's first state Senate race, a former state legislator, and really enjoyed the intersection of law and public policy. So once I graduated law school, I had the opportunity to come back to Beacon full time, and I haven't left since. I have the best job in the world.
Let's talk a minute about, just in general, about think tanks, and kind of, I'm hoping that folks from the public will kind of listen to this conversation, because, I mean, think tanks, are they they're nonpartisan think tanks, partisan think tanks, biased think tanks, non-biased? How does the public organize themselves or understand how the different think tanks operate and work? And how do you trust one think tank's material versus another think tank's material?
Yeah, it's a good question. And there are a lot of think tanks out there, and they range from conservative to liberal to middle of the road. Some do purely research. Others, like us, will use research as a foundation, making sure that the policy solutions we develop are actually solving a real problem, that they're grounded in data and ensuring that they're accurate solutions to problems, that they're not going to have these side effects or things like that. If we're going to ask you as a legislator, hey, you should take this idea and turn it into legislation and pass it, so we want to come alongside you and help you achieve that. And so we've got the capacity not just to do the research and develop policy solutions, but we go out and explain to the public why this issue matters. In a lot of ways, the things that we work on, they may not get headlines, they may not be the most controversial or most attention grabbing subject, but we've identified that as a real problem for Tennesseans. We've developed a solution that we think will solve that problem, and then we will work to turn those ideas into action and help get them passed legislatively or through actions by the governor or that kind of thing, because we believe that those solutions are that important for Tennesseans.
If I'm a person, just a John Q. citizen, and I'm reading materials, what would you say the difference between like an organization like the Beacon Center is and some of the more traditional ones that we hear a lot about, like the Pew Foundation or some of those the Hoover Institute or some of those kind of foundations?
Yeah, some organizations typically do research, even the Sycamore Institute here in Tennessee, which is a great resource, a great organization. They provide research and let others determine what they should do with that research. We actually go deeper, and we work to ensure that once we've developed a solution to a problem, that we want to help get that solution across the finish line. So a lot more public awareness, a lot more communication, polling, and things like that.
Yeah, and I guess how does the public know? Because, or maybe y'all tell us, and I just haven't paid attention. But hey, look, we're looking at this from this perspective, and we're looking at this from this. How does the public know? How would someone know that?
It kind of depends on the organization. For us, we're very open about being conservative leaning and the principles that we believe in. But we also know that, especially these days, there's a lot of skepticism for institutions and organizations, government and otherwise. And it's fair. Some of that skepticism is healthy. And so we try to buttress. We don't just come out and say, hey, we've got the best idea ever. We actually buttress that with research to show if other states have done this, how it's worked, what we've learned from those other states, what we can do different as a state if we pursue that particular policy. We do, since 2023, we've polled quarterly the public. So we can not only say we believe this is important, but we put out our poll and we actually survey fellow Tennesseans about the issues that we discuss and even issues we don't work on, to really get the sense for where Tennesseans are. We just launched a new project last month that I'm really excited about called Tensight. And it's a voter insight hub that not only has polling, but will have focus groups and man on the street interviews, Tennesseans in their own words, talking about these issues. So you can see how Tennesseans feel about things like K-12 education or access to health care, to really essentially say, here's what Tennesseans believe and why, not so much here's what we believe and why. Sometimes that's consistent with our position on things. Sometimes it's not. We frequently release poll results that are inconsistent with our position on something. We may be opposed to some type of change or reform that the public generally supports. And so by being honest brokers about that and providing that information, everything I see in our polling, you see. We release our crosstabs, and every minute detail that I'm able to see, we publish that information, because we really believe in transparency and putting out everything that we can, and to some degree let voters decide for themselves.
Now, do y'all do Is your polling vertically integrated, meaning y'all do your own polling, or do you have an outside entity that does your polling for you and then provides you the data that you then disseminate and dissect?
We have a polling firm that does that. They've done some political polling. They're actually more, they do a lot more market type research that you would think of more private sector, like companies do, which I think is helpful because they are very good at making sure that the questions we asked are fair and unbiased and really tell the whole story. You can always distort questions to get the answers you want, but because we publish everything, we can be open to that criticism as well. And so even reporters who will say, hey, Beacon is biased, they have a position on this issue, but they asked a very fair question and they did it in a very open and transparent way. And so between having a very reputable professional firm do this for us and publishing all of that information, we feel that our poll has become the standard bearer for polls across the state in terms of the organizations that do quarterly or routine polling regularly because of those things.
Is it fair, as someone looking at, because as you know, because we've known each other a long time, and you know how the legislature works because you've been around it a long time, and so we get information from a lot of different think tanks. Is it fair to look at a think tank and say, okay, who's funding this? Even though they may walk into the office and say, we're nonpartisan, and you kind of read through their whatever information they've provided, and you go, this seems to be having a certain slant to it. Sure. Is it fair to look at who provides the resources for that think tank to help decide whether you feel like, well, this is left of center, or right down the middle?
It depends. I mean, if you feel like there is that bias, then it's fair to ask the question, why? Where is it coming from? But also on the flip side, it's fair to think about those donors. And for us, for example, we protect the privacy of our donors, not because we don't want to be accused of bias. We get accused of that because we protect their privacy. But this day and age, with doxing, with things that, if somebody disagrees with us, they might not just come after me. They may come after our actual donors and try to bully them out of supporting us. And the legislature has even passed legislation to protect nonprofits from having to provide that information to the government in a way that could be used, in bad ways by others. And so, we really take that balance and go, okay, we protect the privacy of our donors. We know we're going to be criticized for that. So what can we do to make sure that our data is sound, that it's backed up by evidence, that we're being transparent in what we do, and that we're being consistent with our principles? People can disagree with our policy positions all day long, and many people do. But to say that we are inconsistent or we're taking some position weirdly because of some kind of funding would be hard to say about us because of the consistency of the positions that we take. And frankly, that's probably for me, that integrity and that reputation for being consistent is far more important than any dollar. And we've turned down donations because we've said this is not really consistent with what we stand for, and we're not pay for play. We're not going to take a position on something that we otherwise wouldn't take because you're offering us funds to do so.
Well, I may not always like it, but I have always considered y'all pretty good about calling balls and strikes, and I might not always like the call, but I think y'all have been, in my time, I think y'all's material has been, as straightforward and honest as any that we see.
I appreciate
With that in mind, so what when you started at the Beacon Center and now that you're leading the Beacon Center, just for the audience, what is y'all's mission? I mean, is it just public policy, or are you public policy and advocacy? I mean, what do you see y'all's role in Tennessee state government being?
At the end of the day, we feel like our job is to make Tennessee the best place to live, work, and raise a family. We want to protect Tennesseans' freedoms. We believe that Tennesseans are better off when they're able to keep more of their hard-earned money, when they're easily able to start and grow a business without too much government interference, to choose their kids' school, because as parents, they're in the best decision to do so, have access to quality health care. And job opportunities, and all those things that will allow Tennesseans to thrive. And we do that in a variety of ways. Obviously, public policy being a central piece to what we do. Much of the things that make that possible and allow people to live the American dream in our state are as a result of legislation that you pass. And so we spend a lot of time talking about what those priorities should be and helping get those reforms passed that we think will make the biggest difference in Tennesseans' lives. But we also have a legal arm. We understand that courts make policy too. And you're a part-time legislature, right? And so if you're not in session after April and somebody's rights are being violated by a local government or some government entity, we now have 3 attorneys on staff full time that will represent Tennesseans free of charge at no cost to them when their constitutional rights are violated, because sometimes we have to move more quickly than we can wait for the next legislative session to come about in order to protect Tennesseans' rights. And so those are the 2 main avenues that we effectuate change through the policymaking process and then through the courts when it comes to protecting Tennesseans' constitutional rights.
I don't think I knew that. That's real. When did y'all start doing that, Justin? When did
We've
y'all?
probably been litigating for about 8 years now, but really it's really been in the last 2 to 3 years. We've always been a think tank that litigates since we launched that
So
arm.
you have become a litigator by extension. By extension.
I'm on one of our cases. I'm on our school choice case, but I stay out of most of the litigation.
Yeah.
I have
Well,
much
earlier I
smarter
asked you, did
attorneys
you want to
than
be a
me
litigator? And you said, no, not really. But now here you are, you're a litigator.
doing a
So
little bit of it.
good for
That's right.
you. Yeah.
Getting the best of both worlds.
We've both been around the legislature in Tennessee a long time now. Do you see, is the legislature different today than the legislature you were introduced to back in 2008, 2009?
It is. In some ways, it's different. In others, it's very similar. I mean, even if you go back to the days when Democrats were in control of the legislature, fiscal responsibility was still a big deal. And if you think about Doug Henry and others who really left a legacy as more conservative, fiscally minded Democrats, Governor Bredesen even on fiscal issues, left the state in pretty good shape by and large because it was really core to our view as a state that we're going to be more fiscally responsible than Washington. And the only thing you're constitutionally mandated to do as a legislature every year is balance the budget, right? And even Democrats took that very seriously. So that hasn't changed. That fiscal responsibility has been very consistent through, even going back to Democrats, through now Lieutenant Governor McNally as chairman of finance, and then now you've really carried the mantle on that and ensured that first and foremost, we're going to maintain our fiscal responsibility as a state. And I think that is a very undervalued aspect of what's made Tennessee great. And so I'm grateful for you and those who came before you for doing that. That has been very consistent throughout. There's a lot more populism now, and there's just a lot more populism in the world, right? It's not even an American thing with the rise of President Trump really tapping into people who felt left out of the system. We see it all over the world. And so it's not any surprise that we see more of that in the state legislature and more legislators who work on those issues that, they hear more on the ground from Tennesseans. And that's a little bit of a mixed bag for us because sometimes those issues need to be solved. There's a reason President Trump is in power because people were ignored for so long and expect something different. And so there are real issues that never were addressed that are now, and that's a good thing. There are others that populism comes with this, whoever screaming the loudest gets the attention. And sometimes those issues are, maybe they're not unimportant, but they tend to overshadow issues that are important. And part of what we do and what we've tried to maintain with our relationships in the legislature, to your point about being honest brokers, is to say, hey, this may not be the most salacious issue or the most attractive issues or get you the most likes on Facebook, but it's really, really important that you address this in order to protect our status as a strong state with a strong economy. So don't forget about those issues either.
Yeah. Do you think legislators are different, or do you think the legislators of 20 years ago, 30 years ago, are still the same, or we tend to feel like we're better informed than we used to be because of organizations like the Beacon Center and just the ability to access information. But what's your kind of thought about just the general person that's in the legislature? Is it kind of the same person that's always been there?
Yeah, I think it's evolved a little bit too, just like the public has. I think, you used to have a lot more lawyers in the legislature, for example. There aren't that many anymore. And so I think it's to your point when you're crafting legislation, on one hand, you need more kind of that perspective to craft legislation well because you have fewer experts in the legal field, if you will. On the flip side, I think having healthcare professionals and people from all different walks of life in the legislature is a very healthy thing because you are a part-time legislature and you don't want to professionalize the job so much that you become elitist or insular and you're not listening to your constituents. And I think having what it seems to me to be a more diverse array of legislators with different backgrounds and different careers has become a very healthy thing. I feel like the Judiciary Committee, for example, used to be almost all lawyers, and it's just not that way anymore. And I think that's actually a really good thing and makes our legislature more of a citizen legislature like it was intended than it got for a while.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But it also means that we rely on organizations like yours and others to really provide us with useful, meaningful, well-researched information. Because if you don't live in the healthcare space during the time that you're not in the legislature, you're not going to understand everything that's going on in healthcare. And if you're not a lawyer living in the legal space, you're not. And we need people that help us kind of understand how issues are framed and what the public thinks about those issues. Would the Beacon Center be considered a small think tank, a mid-size, or a large think tank? What I'm trying to get at is, based on your size, what strengths and weaknesses does that bring to your organization?
Sure. But as far as state think tanks, we're actually part of a network called the State Policy Network. I believe there's 64 state think tanks across the country now. We're the only one in Tennessee, so some states have multiple. We're about mid-sized, and those can range from 2 to 3 employees up to some of the largest have over 100. We're at about a dozen now. We're at 11 specifically on our team, and so that puts us pretty much in the sweet spot there. We are much smaller than national think tanks that you think of, like Heritage, Cato, Heartland, America First Now. Those think tanks are much larger, work on a variety of issues, and of course work on national policy and throughout the country. Because we're smaller, one of our weaknesses is that we have limited resources. And so we've got to focus and prioritize those resources in a way that it ensures that we're supporting the issues that matter most. And we work really hard to kind of have a ground up approach to identifying problems and going out and talking to Tennesseans, doing statewide listening tours to really understand what the real challenges Tennesseans face and how to prioritize our resources to address those challenges rather than going out and trying to boil the ocean. I remember back early on when I came to Beacon, we would put out legislative guides with like over 200 policy solutions in all kinds of different areas.
I remember
It's
those.
impossible to work on those. And it's to be fair to legislators, we get criticized like, well, you asked me to do this thing, but then you're not going to help me, do it. And so we decided, you know what? We're really going to stay laser focused and work on no more than 5-6 core issues at a time. And those will evolve a little bit. Things like education and healthcare issues that we've always worked on, tax issues we'll always work on. But housing is an issue that we never had worked on until we did our listening tour a few years ago and realized this is the biggest challenge facing Tennesseans, not just in Middle Tennessee where we've seen a lot of growth, but even in rural parts of the state. Where people are having to drive long distances to work because they can't find affordable housing nearby. And that led us to work with you on property tax reform because we found that that's one of the biggest drivers to higher housing costs and putting what is really one of the most central parts of the American dream of home ownership out of reach for a lot of Tennesseans. And so, by listening to Tennesseans, we've been able to focus those limited resources on the things that we believe matter the most.
Well, and I would say that from my perspective, perhaps your greatest strength is your Tennessee centric.
Yeah.
A lot of the bigger organizations that you referenced, yeah, they have really good information, but to some degree, you have to take that information and then try and extrapolate it down to your particular state or your particular community. And the thing that the Beacon Center does, and I guess I'd say other similar, probably in other states, those that are very centric to their state, they're focusing in on the things that may be included in those bigger organizations, but we're seeing them from the perspective of what Tennesseans think. And I think that's really important and really helpful to legislators like me. You've mentioned a couple of times polling. What is the state of polling today? There's a lot of discussion around the accuracy of polling and how does the layperson disseminate or understand what that polling is telling them. What's your general feel about polling in today's world?
I think the public perception is one of distrust, just like it is with a lot of other things when it comes to institutions. I think polling, if you look at some of the presidential polling and how inaccurate it's been and how wrong it's been, people perceive it to be driving an agenda or trying to, get the result that they want. And when we decided to start polling, we really thought about how can we do this in a way that is trustworthy, that is beneficial, because there's no point in doing it. We could get the results we wanted all day long on the issues we care about, but if people don't trust the polling, then they're not going to listen to it. They're going to ignore it. So what's the point? And polling's not cheap. And so if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. And that's what ultimately led us to the firm that we hired. Our firm is slightly Democrat leaning. And so our polling, if you compare it to some of the more Republican polling firms, is probably not going to be as strong on the GOP results as some. For instance, Senator Blackburn is leading pretty consistently across all polls that have been done in the state. She's not leading by quite as much in our poll as she is in some other polls.
But y'all made that decision consciously, I'm assuming.
Yes, we did. We wanted to err on the side of caution. And if the actual results on election day are better than what our polling said they were for, the candidate that's winning and that kind of stuff, then great, because we're not inflating the results. We're being more conservative about it. And so that's one thing.
That's really fascinating. That's really fascinating to me. Just a minute on this thread is that an organization that you started out with by saying, we would be viewed as a conservative organization, consciously uses a polling firm that probably is going to be lean more liberal in order to kind of, in my mind, balance your conservative bias against what the public may actually be thinking. I don't think that everyone would realize that in your polling that you've kind of consciously done that, and that's really creative and thoughtful.
Well, and again, we really feel that the polling is helpful for Tennesseans to see where their neighbors stand on issues, and for policymakers to understand where their constituencies are on those issues. And if we were to twist and distort it in a way to get the results we wanted, you're going to pretty quickly figure out that we're wrong. If we're telling you that the public supports school choice or the public supports property tax reform, and then you go out every single day into your community and talk to those actual voters, and they're not, aligned with that. And yes, you're going to have pockets that are louder against some of these things. And you've got to be discerning about that as a policymaker. But you're going to pretty quickly figure out that our poll is BS if you're hearing the exact opposite than what we're telling you. And so part of it really is the same as I've mentioned as an organization as a whole. It's our credibility. It's that authenticity about who we are and what we stand for. And we want to be very accurate in what we're telling you and not be misleading, because it doesn't help our relationship if we're telling you one thing and the voters believe the other.
Well, before we get into a couple of policy areas that you're currently working on, let's talk about a couple from the past and how you kind of positioned yourself as thought leaders in that space. And one would be, back in, I don't know, was it 2013 or so with Medicaid expansion? I think you guys leaned in pretty heavy on that. And of course, Tennessee is still not an expansion state. How did that all come about, and what was y'all's strategy there?
Yeah, we had watched other states that were essentially opting into Obamacare's expansion. The Affordable Care Act set up a mechanism for states to pretty significantly expand their Medicaid rolls. And the concept was we can prevent hospital closures and expand access to care. Well, when we really started to delve into that, we really became worried that, number one, the state was going to be on a pretty significant fiscal hook if things didn't go as planned.
By the way, Justin, this is all playing out almost exactly as y'all kind of predicted with
it really is. And, even more than we thought. So we did, when the One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed recently, it limited how much states could rely on the provider tax that comes from hospitals to cover Medicaid expansion. We ran the numbers and determined that had we expanded Medicaid when it was up, today we would be facing about a $750 million budget shortfall because of the limits on using that revenue source to cover the expansion. And that's assuming that the population enrolling in Medicaid was what was projected. And another problem we had with it, we were seeing very early on in these other states that they were vastly underestimating how many people would enroll in Medicaid, and thus vastly underestimating the total cost. And so we tried to make that case to legislators that this is a very risky endeavor. We had a very good relationship and highly respected Governor Haslam and appreciated and understood why he was proposing what he was proposing. And as Medicaid expansions go, it was much more reasonable than what we were seeing in some other states. But we made the case that this is potentially very problematic from a fiscal standpoint, but that it also was not the moral solution to the problem. Just giving someone an insurance card, and effectively in this case a government insurance card, does not give them access to quality health care. Fewer and fewer doctors are taking Medicaid. And so it's almost are we really telling people we're going to give you Medicaid without being honest about what that really meant in terms of their access to coverage and care, versus other solutions that we've proposed along the way, from telehealth to certificate of need reform, which you have been very engaged on, that really can expand access to quality care, particularly in rural areas and among lower income Tennesseans, far better than just expanding a government program could ever do.
Well, and I think it also led to helping Tennessee become the only Medicaid state which has a block grant.
Yeah.
Which has allowed us to do incredible things that, the public probably doesn't really see or pay attention to. But we are, our TennCare program, for all of its limitations, is probably the best Medicaid program in the United States, because we're a block grant. We get to do some things that others just don't get to do. And part of that's because we didn't take on some of these other costs that other states are now dealing with.
You're exactly right. And when things like Hurricane Helene happens, we're able to use, I think it was $100 million of the savings that we've realized as a state because of that block grant to go in and help our fellow Tennesseans in need. And so, I think that at the time it was very fraught. We got lots of hate and criticism for our position on it. As did you and other legislators throughout that time. But looking back, it was the right thing to do as a state, and doing other things instead have really catapulted our healthcare access for Tennesseans in ways that Medicaid expansion just never could have done.
Yeah. And then the Beacon Center, y'all have leaned in heavily on things like the hall tax, death tax and inheritance tax, all those kind of things. I mean, y'all have been thought leaders for the state as we've eliminated those really over the past, 10 or 12 years.
And our goal has been to be a resource for you and other leaders who champion those reforms. The whole income tax, interestingly, was what led us to start doing more advocacy, because we learned through that process how to engage our fellow Tennesseans in the process, make it easy for them to contact their legislators, tell stories about people. There was this notion that, well, only rich people pay the hall tax, but it just simply wasn't true. And this was a tax that was eating into retirees' nest eggs, and was just not the Tennessee way to tax people for being frugal and saving for retirement. And we were successful in making that case, and really learned a lot about how to advocate on an issue and how to support legislators who champion those issues, and turn that in, really learn from that and use that model on every issue we work on now.
Yeah, for those in the audience, it was actually called the Hall income tax. Tennessee, in our Constitution, we don't have an income tax, but yet we had this Hall tax, which was a tax on dividends. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people across the state were paying this tax, and we'd go out and campaign saying how, we didn't support a state income tax, and people in the audience would say, well, wait a minute, fella, I'm paying some kind of income tax here. And we did it and much to y'all's help with this, we eliminated the tax in the way we sort of gradually eliminated it, so that it didn't overstress really local governments, because a lot of local governments were using those tax dollars to offset other taxes. And so we had to kind of step it down so they had some time to adjust to the changes without just a fiscal cliff all of a sudden hitting many of our local governments. But yeah.
Well, and that's part of going back to kind of our reputation and approach. We could be all or nothing on something like that. When we know the hall tax needs to go, we could say you're either eliminating them 1 year or, we're out of here. But we didn't. We learned to work through the process and find ways to be pragmatic and fiscally responsible. It's kind of how I feel about the property tax reform. I know you've talked about that on your show, and you're championing an approach to limiting local property taxes, triggering a referendum for larger property taxes so voters have a say. There are a lot of our friends and your colleagues who would just like to eliminate property taxes. A lot of the public would like to eliminate property taxes. And frankly, I would too, selfishly, because I hate paying them. They're one of the worst taxes that we have. But because local governments rely on them for roughly half of their revenue, it's simply not feasible to take that approach. And so we've tried to find ways to maintain our principles, but be pragmatic about the solutions so that we can actually accomplish big things without just, pounding our chest and saying that it has to be our way or the highway about things.
In this legislative session, obviously, we're working together on the property tax issue. What other issues are y'all leaning into this session?
So we're really closely engaging on the governor's plan to expand school choice. We've been very involved in school choice efforts for many years. We're very proud to be part of the effort to bring universal school choice to families all across the state last year. We got a lot of demand for the program, roughly twice as many applicants as available scholarships. So we support expanding that program. I know that a lot of that will revolve around revenues and the budget. A lot of that will revolve around your committee because this year it's tied so much to the budget than it was last year. But we support that effort. We're supporting the governor's efforts to repeal certificate of need laws. This is something that it's one of those issues that doesn't get headlines and a lot of attention, but really, really matters. You have to get government permission for a lot of different services when you want to add healthcare services. Used to be a lot worse. Y'all have done a great job as a legislature to pare those back. I mean, at one point, you had to go get government permission to add a new hospital bed in an existing hospital. That made no sense. And the way it was structured was that your opponents, your competitors could essentially veto much of what you wanted to do. It'd almost be like, McDonald's getting to decide whether Chick-fil-A opens across the street. And so we made a lot of progress on that. The Trump administration has tied some rural healthcare grants to some of these reforms, including certificate of need reform. And so it's a tough lift. We know that. But it's one of those that we really feel is important and will significantly expand access to quality healthcare. Because of the denials of these certificates for new services in the state, we've lost about $700 million in lost new healthcare services in communities all across Tennessee. So we really feel, probably more than anything, that this change could expand access to healthcare in a big way.
So pivoting just a little bit and getting a little bit more editorial, I guess, Tennessee has continued to move up in the rankings in terms of states that are viewed for liberty and freedom and those kind of things. What's your general perspective, the landscape of Tennessee politically and how we play into that? And we've got a new administration that's going to be coming in next year. I think the legislature would be viewed as being very conservative at this point. What's your view of the landscape politically of Tennessee moving into the next administration, the next few years out?
I'm very optimistic, and I'm an optimistic person by nature, but I really think that both what you have done as a legislature and what Governor Lee and past governors have done have laid a wonderful foundation to build on. The challenge is we are in a competitive environment where 50 states serve as laboratories of democracy. So we may be number one on any given issue today, but wake up tomorrow and we're no longer number one because that's another state, passed a reform or cut a tax or repealed a tax entirely. And so we've always got to be looking at what's happening across the country and how do we make Tennessee the best place to live, work, and raise a family. And that involves strong tax policy. I think there's still work to be done to be more competitive on business taxes in particular. I think to your point earlier about property taxes, I think we've done such a great job at the state level. But if we let local governments continue to raise local property taxes unabated, that's going to really impact our competitiveness as a state and our ability for people to create jobs and opportunities. We need to have good labor policy as more and more jobs are gravitating to the South, paying close attention to things like the Volkswagen plant with the UAW and the impact that has. I'll have an op-ed actually coming out in the Times Free Press soon on that topic and why good labor policy is critical to our success as a state. So it's one thing to say, well, what got us here? How do we, stay committed to those principles that made us a strong state in the first place, but also looking at what other states are doing so that we maintain that competitive edge, because there are a lot of states, Tennessee, Texas, Florida, that are competing for the jobs and the businesses and the workers that are fleeing states like California, New York, and Illinois because they're doing the opposite. And so I think we really need to learn from that.
Justin, before we go, I have one last really question. I think it's a really important question because there's a lot of conversation, not just in Tennessee, but really around the country about the involvement and the engagement of young people in the political process. What's your advice? Number one, what's your advice to a young person interested in public office or in working in the space you work in where you affect public policy, but also just your advice in terms of young people being engaged in the political process itself?
Yeah, well, I'm living proof of this. I actually started as an intern at Beacon and worked my way up to the CEO somehow. So you never know what's going to happen and where your career may take you if you get involved at a young age. There's a lot of opportunities in Washington. There's great internship opportunities. And I did one myself. I interned at the Pentagon in law school, and it was a tremendous experience. But frankly, it paled in comparison to working at the state level. And so I would really encourage anyone looking to get involved, work at the state legislature. They have fantastic internships at the legislature where you really get immersed in the policy making process. Groups like Beacon offer internships. We're happy to host interns and give them exposure to public policy. And there are all kinds of ways to intern or volunteers, not only at the state level, but in your local community as well. And so I would just look for those opportunities to get involved. Pick an issue you care about and figure out what groups are working on that issue so I can volunteer and support that. Look for internships to give you exposure to public policy, because you may decide, I don't want to just do this for fun. I want to do this for a career. And I can't tell you how rewarding the career is when you get to impact your fellow Tennesseans' lives. So I would strongly encourage anyone who's young and looking to get engaged to think about this world.
From your work, your policy work, do you feel like that younger citizens are less engaged, more engaged, about the same? I mean, when you look at social media, you would think that, gosh, everybody's engaged, right? Just by the way that the yelling and the screaming. But what's your general sense of that?
I do think that there are younger people are less engaged socially. I think we've seen that with some statistics around loneliness and things like that. And they're very online, right? So much of their engagement is online and not as much in person. But I think, like anything, the pendulum swings. And I think as they get to the point where they're graduating college and looking for career opportunities, we've got a young professional society at Beacon that's extremely well attended. Yes, we offer them free booze and snacks, so that helps. But they want the camaraderie. They want to be around other young professionals who care about public policy, care about issues that our state and nation face. And so while I do think that there is a concerning trend towards isolationism among young people, I think that a lot more young people are really looking to get engaged in the process. And I hope that we are good about opening the doors to them and paying it forward, because I had this when I was younger. I had, even legislators and others really welcome me into this world with open arms. And I try to pay that forward and do the same, because once you're in, it's really, really rewarding to be part of the process, even if it's just as a volunteer, occasionally weighing in on something. You find that there are a lot more people like you out there. So I think we can resolve that issue of the isolationism that we're seeing in younger generations, because I think there is a desire on their part to be socially engaged as well.
Well, Justin, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate the dialogue. It's been great. Folks, we've been having a conversation with Justin Owen, the CEO and president of the Beacon Center, a policy/think tank/thought leader in the state of Tennessee around public policy. If you've enjoyed today's show, which I hope you did, because Justin's been a great guest, please click the like button and share it with your friends. It helps get the podcast out. It also helps inform Tennesseans about what's going on in and around the state of Tennessee politically and in the public space. So again, Justin, thank you for being my guest today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate all you do and all your leadership for Tennesseans.